Oh boy, I'm gonna get some flack for this video, aren't I? Spider-Man: No Way Home has been the talk of the town for a while, and people are going off about how much they love this movie. But I can't help but feel that this film is a big letdown, and wastes a lot of its opportunities to execute them in the most generic way possible, in no small part due to its existence within the MCU. I wanted to love this film. Hell, it made me tear up in one or two places. But overall, the filmmaking here is incredibly mediocre and relies on its premise alone to keep people entertained. That being said, there was another film that came out not too long before it that did everything this movie wanted to, but miles better. Pun a little bit intended. What I want to do here is compare these two films and prove why No Way Home is barely even a husk compared to its animated counterpart. Now, plot and story aren't exactly the same thing. Plot has more to do with the physical beats of the story and the what is actually happening, where story is about what the film is actually about, and constitutes things like theme and the entire reason for its existence. Both of these films use plot as the draw for each respective one, with each premise revolving around various Spider-Man timelines merging together. Comic book fans are being treated a lot more recently with these kinds of stories now that their respective franchises have had a chance to build themselves up and make their universes known to the wider world. Spiderverse, however, is the only one of the two that has its story front and centre, right from the first second of the film to the end. It was no secret that No Way Home was going to be a live-action Spider-Verse, and we were all here for it, but it became very apparent that there wasn't an actual story to tell, or at least that things were warped in order for Spider-Verse to fit in, even if that fit was rather clunky. That's not to say that No Way Home doesn't have an interesting story. I love the message of Peter trying to save all of the villains and the price of being a good man, but it becomes apparent that the film would rather prioritise its references, spectacles and throwbacks than spend time fleshing out its theme. Hell, they went out of their way to put memes in the film even if it stood out like an organic web shooter. Into the Spider-Verse has tons of references too, but they stand in accompaniment with the rest of the story. The style and flair of this film means it can throw them at you without it being
Understand? I do. I understood that reference. Shall we play, Doctor?
With that said, the film is about what it means to be Spider-Man, and that anyone can be him, and it never forgets that. The recurring gag of the Spider-Man origin story contributes to that theme, and further develops it. That's where Spider-Verse succeeds, in that the plot and theme have a yin-yang dynamic that makes all the weird stuff fluid and natural, whereas No Way Home doesn't even attempt that. Both of these films revel in their characters, and are definitely the standout of both films. No Way Home brings back the classic live-action villains, and expands on their former glory while utilising them in different and interesting ways. Spider-Verse uses that same base knowledge, but twists it to show the audience fun new variations of the things that we know without relying on nostalgia at all. Again though, I think that's where Spider-Verse stands dominant, as its references don't overshadow anything that the film is trying to say. I do appreciate No Way Home's attempt to make itself stand apart from Spider-Verse, and I give kudos to the film for the smaller moments between the villains and Spider-Man, almost tying up loose ends with the characters, but that's all this movie provides, and that's not enough to make this movie anything but dumb fun, because frankly, those villains have already had complete stories. Their presence here serves Tom's Spider-Man, but not their own. One area I can't fault either for is Spider-Man himself. Both Peter and Miles provide a perfect look at the young naive Spiderling and his journey to better understand himself and the responsibility that comes with great power or whatever. Although I'll admit No Way Home does botch this a little bit right at the end. The additional Spider-Men are interesting to look at and are quite differently handled here. Again, I have to give points to Spider-Verse. The actual inclusion of multiple vastly different Spider-Men accentuates the notion of anyone being Spider-Man, and doesn't feel forced. No Way Home seems to only want to drive the nostalgia bar up. I will say, I think it does a commendable job of having the three Peters interact with one another in heartfelt ways to help Tom Holland's Spider-Man become his own person, but it's so harsh. It's definitely a personal nitpick of mine, but it took me out of the movie that we only got to see two other universes and makes the story seem super shallow, as this is everything the film is building up to. And to add to that, the film doesn't even want to do anything interesting with Garfield and Maguire other than address comparisons between the three. It's unfortunate, and I think the script could have done a better job of making their inclusion fluid and meaningful. No Way Home falls into the same trap as every other MCU film, in that it has to have a boring palette that provides some consistency throughout each film. It's not particularly an insult to this film, but when it comes to visual prowess, there's nothing that really stands out. People might point to certain action-oriented shots, however, the only reason they're memorable is because of who is in them, not because there's anything striking about the composition. I'm not saying every shot needs to be an artful one, but there's nothing in this film at all, other than the occasional slow-mo close-up. The last two Holland films felt very much the same way, but that is a wider issue. Action-wise, I was very let down. The fluidity and funness is very present, but all but one of the action scenes took place at night, and most didn't even have an interesting reason to take place then. The first fight with Doc Ock was the standout, but that was purely because of it being daytime. There was a lot of bleh in that fight that didn't feel as meaty as the past Spider-Man flicks. Even the final showdown was lackluster, with again the only standouts being the occasional exchange between characters, which leads me to the big issue. There is just so much unnecessary talking in this movie. A bit the film is doing is done, but then the film decides it needs to drag it out for another minute in case you forgot what it was. The character of Ned suffered particularly in this regard. There was no room for acting, or for the film to breathe. These Marvel films try to distract the audience from the emptiness of the story by filling it with quips, and I think No Way Home is the epitome of that. Music was really non-existent, but I wasn't expecting anything else. The MCU has never really done an amazing job with scores outside of a few themes here and there, but it was very apparent in No Way Home, with the film borrowing off the far better scores of the Garfield and Maguire films, and even here they're short-lived, uses references as opposed to cool reinterpretations. This was a weird thing to write. I had a blast with No Way Home, and hate being so negative all the time. But with the MCU as it is, and the fans also as they are, I think it is important to discuss shortcomings of everything. If you hate me for this, that's fine. If you disagree, that's also fine. We're here to discuss, and as long as I can, that's what I'm going to do. Because can we please stop sucking off this franchise? Marvel is constantly trying to one-up the scale of these films, and it really ruins any sense of tension or drama. No Way Home feels like two different Spider-Man movies in one. The first is an intimate journey of a Spider-Man who has to face the light of the public, and the second is a wacky wizard adventure to protect the multiverse. It's very clear to everyone why the studio felt they need to merge the two though. Maybe they'll slow down at some point, but they're not showing any sign of doing that anytime soon, and it's beginning to be a major detriment to the quality of their films. Love this movie or not, there are some serious issues here, and it's a shame, because what we could have had could have been far more deserving of that $1 billion it made, instead of just being a studio milking the spider cow for everything it's worth.